How long have you been a teacher?
I've been a teacher for 6 years.
What have you noticed? When I say, let me try this. When I say Brown versus Board of Education, what comes to your mind?
When I hear Brown versus Board of Education, I think of a failed attempt at racially integrating schools across the United States.
Why do you say failed attempt?
Failed attempt because schools are still segregated. And the state that I currently live in, New York State, has the most segregated schools in the nation. And the city that I teach in, New York City, last I checked, had the third most segregated schools across the nation.
What makes them segregated?
Aside from the very clear racial segregation, we realize that students of color just don't receive a free and appropriate education as guaranteed them. We see that students of color are made to go to schools that have far less resources than what's necessary for them to have a quality education. We also see that students of color, when they look to the front of the classroom, more often than not are looking to someone who is white. They are being educated through a curriculum that does not reflect positively their culture. They're usually fed a curriculum that praises Eurocentric values, and whenever they read about themselves, it's within the context of genocide or slavery. We also realize that students of color experience suspension and expulsion by far greater rates than their white counterparts. I would call that modern day segregation.
Wow. So you have taught in predominantly white schools and predominantly schools of color?
Yeah, 5 years in a predominantly white school, and this is the first year that I've taught in a predominantly Black and Latinx school.
Tell me the differences that you experienced.
The differences I experience just as a teacher is that in predominantly white schools, first of all, I had all the resources in the world that I needed to really enhance my curriculum and to make it engaging so that students sitting through a 57-minute class could interact and could find different points of entry into the content. Whereas in the predominantly Black school, we're very limited. We often struggle just to have basic necessities like paper and writing utensils, let alone trying to, bring in other creative tools to enhance curriculum. I also felt that in the predominantly Black school, on the positive side, there's a stronger sense of community and stronger relationships, because we need that. It helps us to compensate for the things that we are clearly missing that the institution is supposed to be providing us.
How does this all make you feel as an African American educator, and then particularly as an African American man?
Overwhelmed, overworked, underappreciated, as if the weight of the world is on my shoulders, and as if it's up to me to save my people and at the same time educate the white folk. Whereas I also realized that I'm a product of a broken system as well. I attended a segregated school where I was usually the only Black kid in the classroom. And so when conversations about slavery happened, folks looked to me as the expert. At 7 years old, I wasn't an expert in anything. And I still feel that burden today. Because Black men only make up 2% of educators across the nation, we often are just made to carry the weight of that realization. And so what that means is that, I'm constantly trying to deal with social issues in the school, because when your children act up, they go and look for the Black men to get them in line. It's a broken system, and usually we are the ones trying to hold it together.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you feel is important enough to state for the record?
I think that the issue of school segregation really is, how do I want to say this?
Take your time.
I think when we're talking about school segregation, at the same time, we're having a conversation about America's original sin, which is race. We know that racism existed before race. And so for us to suggest that, well, schools are segregated because that's where people live, that's a cop-out. That's us really trying to justify the way things are, when really schools were intentionally segregated, just like neighborhoods have been intentionally segregated. And so our founder, the founder of Integrated NYC, has often said, because segregation has been intentional, desegregation and integration also must be intentional.